trust me, I have tried all the different methods to preserve potatoes, and I have to admit, I've failed several times. But in my research and discovery attempts, I found 3 methods which I think works best for the home cook. Now I'm going to share these methods with you and confess to my past mistakes, because we all make mistakes, right? So let's learn from each other. Okay, mistake number 1. I like buying potatoes in more bulk because the price is better, right? But often I do that, and sometimes I think I kind of forgot we're no longer a family of 5, but empty nesters of 2. And I'd open up my drawer where I keep my potatoes, and yeah, it looked like an alien mass coming out of potatoes. You know, little white tendrils growing or black and whooshy spots. Was not pretty. So I came up with this method, and I still buy my potatoes in bulk. But now I reserve part of them for fresh, and the rest I preserve in one of these 3 methods. And that way I never open my potato drawer and go, oh gosh, because I no longer have to throw away bad potatoes. Before we talk about preservation methods, just know that a potato is primarily starch and almost 80% water. And that starch can cause some problems when you are preserving, depending on what method you choose. And also, there's so many different varieties of potatoes, right? I mean, this is russet. Here's some Yukon Golds. Later in this video, I'm going to show you some red potatoes, red skin potatoes. I mean, there's a lot of different varieties, and each one has their own little nuances in what you have to consider when you preserve them. So I think there's 3 factors to think about before you choose the best method for you. And 1 is the variety of potatoes, like we just talked about. 2 is, how do you want to use the potato? I mean, do you want a great baked potato, or do you want mashed potatoes, or hash browns, or French fries? Decide on how you're going to use them, because that may depend on which method you choose. And then 3, you might have limitations. You know, not have the storage space or the appliance needed to do the preservation method. So options for potato storage include cold storage, freeze drying, freezing, dehydrating, and canning. Now, I do not own a freeze dryer, so I am not going to discuss that option. And I think many of you out there don't either, because of the expense. And for cold storage, again, a lot of you may not have a root cellar, or depending on where you live, a cool spot in your basement. So I am not going to cover that type of storage. So we're going to go into freezing, dehydrating, and canning, and you can decide what is the best method for how you want to use your potatoes that you're preserving. My favorite way to eat a potato is a baked potato, right? Yeah, slathered with butter and salt and a nice crispy skin. I mean, it is so good. And none of the 3 methods I'm going to talk about will allow you to preserve a big potato to make baked potato. But if you do have a cooler area in your basement, I have one that's between 60 and 65 degrees, I can keep potatoes for a period of time in there. So I do use that as alternative, but it might only be 3 months, depending. Now, one of the things I'm going to discuss in this video is blanching, and that is just parboiling your potatoes for a short period of time. Don't skip that step, because that releases some of the starch that can cause problems, like I said, when you're preserving. So make sure you follow the parboiling instructions. And also, we're going to be peeling a lot of potatoes. And don't throw away those peels, because remember, this is a no waste video, so I'm going to tell you ways that you can use those peels at the end of this video. At a viewer's urging, I decided to try freezing potatoes. Now what I found was this method is the absolutely best for French fries, already made mashed potatoes, and it ties with dehydrating for hash browns. And it's really, really easy to do. Now remember, potatoes contain a lot of water, so it's important to pre-cook them slightly before you freeze them, which will help get rid of some of that water so you won't end up with a mushy mess when you thaw your potatoes to use. After you wash your potatoes, peel your potatoes. Now you can skip the peeling step, but I find that the peel kind of changes a little bit of texture when you freeze it, so I like my potatoes naked when I freeze them. But while we're peeling, make sure you're placing them in cold water so they maintain their color and don't start to darken, because potatoes can darken as little as 60 seconds after being exposed to air. I decided to dice my potatoes because that's probably how I'm going to use them. I'm going to pull a bag out of the freezer and dump them into a pot of soup I'm making. But you could decide that you want to make those potatoes into French fries or shred them up for hash browns, or chunks of potato so you can just take them out when you want to make mashed potatoes, or even small whole potatoes you can freeze. This is a step you don't want to miss. You want to parboil or slightly cook your potatoes anywhere from 3 to 10 minutes. I've got pretty good sized dices, so I'm going to parboil them for 6 minutes. And that means you get your water up to a roaring boil, you add in your potatoes, and then you start timing after you have that roaring boil appear again. That is when you set your timer. Time is up, so you can drain your potatoes and place them in an ice bath, or in my case, I am just draining them and running cold tap water over until the potatoes cool. That way I'm stopping the cooking process. Be sure to let your potatoes drain well, and then put a piece of parchment paper on a tray, dump your potatoes on it, and spread them out so you don't have one solid blob. And then you're going to stick them in your freezer, either minimum of 6 hours, but I usually do it overnight. Okay, we're just going to take them out and bag them in the measurements we want. I am vacuum sealing my bags and dating my bags before I put them back in the freezer. And like I said, this is a great way to do dices, but it's the best way to do French fries. They're actually better if you freeze them, the potato first, because it draws out some of the water, so you are going to have crispier French fries. This is also a great way to preserve leftover mashed potatoes. Next up, dehydrating. Dehydrated potatoes will keep on your pantry shelves as long as it's in a dark, cooler place for 5+ years. In fact, I made a video when I actually opened a jar that was 4 years old of potato slices and fried them up and showed how delicious they tasted. And I love dehydrating sliced potatoes. That is the way I do slices. And it makes such great cheesy potatoes. So nice and crispy around the edges. It's just really, really good. I have a recipe down below if you're interested. Mistake number 2 was when I was dehydrating. Remember I told you different varieties might have different levels of starch, and you have to take that in consideration? Well, obviously I did. Now my favorite overall potato is Yukon Gold. It is a yellow, waxier potato, which is getting harder and harder to find in our grocery store. And let's see if I can come up close here to show you. Here is the Yukon Gold. Don't they look beautiful? So white. I also did some russet potatoes, and yeah, see how they kind of look a little brownish? I mean, they're not bad, and they'll taste just fine cooked up. Here's the russet, here's the Yukon Gold. Now, at least I didn't have the dreaded black spot in the middle of my slices, which can sometimes happen. But don't skimp on removing that starch in the blanching process. It is important. And to be honest, I only now dehydrate either Yukon Gold or yellow waxy potatoes for my slices. They just turned out so beautiful. So we wash your potatoes again, and then I peel them. You do not have to. You can skip that step. And then it's time to slice them. I love using a mandolin carefully because you can lose part of your fingertips if you use them wrong, and slice nice thin slices to dehydrate. It is easier to dehydrate if you have uniform slices because then everything will relatively get done at the same time. So in the case of these slices, I blanch my potatoes for 1.5 to 2 minutes. And you see that white frothy stuff? Yeah, that's the starch that's being removed. So again, drain your potatoes, and you can keep that water. When we're talking about waste not, you could actually keep that water, let it cool off, and use it for your houseplants because it has added nutrition. Now I should mention that if you are using frozen potatoes like these potatoes O'Brien, you can skip the blanching process because they were already blanched at the food factory before they were frozen. Although do remember that the actual dehydrating process will take longer because you're working with a frozen product. I use my Excalibur dehydrator, but you can use whatever dehydrator you have. Follow your dehydrator's manual. Or many people now have convection ovens, be it a convection toaster oven or an actual oven itself, and you can dehydrate in those too. Or if you're lucky enough to have a solar cooker, you may be able to dehydrate in that. So there's plenty of opportunities for dehydrating. Let's lay out our slices on our dehydrating tray. Try not to have them touch. You want air to go in between them. And then we're going to stick them in our dehydrator. And in my case, I put my dehydrator on 125 Fahrenheit temperature. Check your manual to see what it recommends for potatoes, and always follow your manual. Now your next question is going to be, okay, so how long will it take? Yeah, that is not an easy question to answer. It depends on how thick your slices are, what type of dehydrator you have. Is there a lot of humidity? A lot of different things can affect it. So it could be only 6 hours, or it could be 12 or more. What you have to do is periodically pull out your trays and inspect. And what you want is a potato that is, for the slices, almost translucent and crispy. And then I pack my dehydrated goods in mason jars. You can pack them however you want. You don't have to vacuum pack them. I do because I believe they keep longer on the shelf. But then make sure you label the date that you dehydrated them. And I think it's a good idea to label what type of potato you dehydrated, just in case you do encounter a problem like this one, right? And if you want to know more about dehydrating, check out my Dehydrating 101 video. The link is down below. Now, if you follow my channel, you know I love to can, be it water bath or pressure canning. And here comes up mistake number 3. I was so excited the first time I canned potatoes. And I don't know if it was the variety, or maybe I didn't look at the processing time right, or whatever. Opened a jar, and it was like, there was kind of like a mass of potatoes in it, not the different dices, and it was starchy tasting. That's the only way I can describe it. It ended up all going down in the garbage disposal, which is pretty darn sad. Too often I see TikTokers and rebel canners on YouTube recommending unsafe practices. It's just not worth it. You do not water bath can potatoes, you pressure can them. You need to remove the peels when you can potatoes, and the reason is because you don't want you or your family to get botulism, and the peel has all those little nooks and crannies, so it's a good place for the botulism bacteria to hide. So always peel your potatoes. And finally, don't raw pack your potatoes. It's not worth it. It has not been tested scientifically. And you know what? Your family's safety is a lot more important than saving a couple minutes canning. Now again, if you are new to pressure canning, I have a video that will help you go through all the basics because I'm going to go through them pretty quick here. Again, the link is down below. Russets are not the best potatoes to can. Yukon Gold or yellow wax potatoes or red skin potatoes are great for canning. So today I am canning red skin potatoes. And again, we wash, we peel, put those potatoes in water so they don't discolor. We dice them up, again putting them back in the water so they don't discolor. And then we're going to drain that water and we're going to parboil for about 2 minutes for the slices I have. If you were doing like small whole potatoes, it might be up to 10 minutes. And then again, you're going to drain them and then we'll get ready for that canning process. Now let's fill our jars with our dices and we want a 1-inch headspace. And then I am using chicken broth, but you can just use water, but it should be boiling. I like to use chicken broth because I think it adds a little extra flavor to the potatoes. If you are just using boiling water, you may want to add a teaspoon of salt to each jar. Now debubble, wipe those rims, place on the lid, and finger tighten your ring. Now you should follow the instructions in your pressure canning manual. Processing time is 35 minutes for pints, but if you had quarts, it would be 40 minutes. And adding chicken broth does not change the processing time whatsoever. Okay, here they are the next day. Don't they look absolutely beautiful? Just make sure that you date and label your jars before cleaning them and putting them on your pantry shelves. Now it is up to you what method or methods you want to use to preserve your potatoes. But remember what I said? Don't throw those peels away, because there's things you can do with them. Oh sure, you can throw them into your compost pile so it'll help feed your garden. And you can have them as a treat for your chickens, but you have to be careful not to give it too often because of salinine in the peel. But my favorite way to use them is to make potato peel crisp. It's so easy. I'm cutting them a little bit more into manageable pieces, tossing them in a little olive oil, and then I'm coating them with a little garlic powder, onion powder, and salt. And just make sure to massage that in well. And then I'm putting them in my air fryer at 400 degrees for about 10 minutes and maybe flipping them halfway through. And you can also make these in your oven. You can place a tray in your 425 degree oven for about 15 to 20 minutes and you'll come out with these same crispy chips. I mean, these are just so good, so crunchy. And if you want, you can cut your peels in smaller bits and actually do the same process, but make toppings for soup or salad. Now, do you want to know the best way to store onions,